Welcome to Up on Game presents Taylor Scouting. Coach Randy Taylor is bringing his 40-plus years of knowledge to you. This is Taylor Scouting. And now, here's Coach Randy Taylor.
Welcome to the Taylor Scouting podcast on the Up on Game network. LeVar Arrington owns this or runs this and does a great job, and he's brought me in to do these podcasts on the Up on Game network. And so it's kind of fun to work with LeVar. Be sure to subscribe to the Up on Game network and watch us on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and then on YouTube on the Up on Game Presents Taylor Scouting channel. And so we're going to educate you, and we're going to share some stories about college football recruiting and football in general. And I'm really fired up to have Tom Luginbill today. We're going to talk about all things college football and football in general. Tom is an outstanding ESPN and ABC college football announcer and analyst. You can see him on Saturdays on the sidelines of some of the biggest games in college football. He's also an integral part of the nation's top scouting service, UCReport, which we'll talk about. And one of my favorite guys is his dad I've known for a long time, Al Luginbill, longtime successful coach and an innovator, in my opinion, in the recruiting and evaluating world. So, Coach Luginbill, tell us about your family briefly.
Well, my parents are doing really, really well. They're both healthy, 76 and 75, living in Arizona. I've got a twin sister who also lives in Arizona. Unfortunately, my travels, as you well know, being in the coaching profession and scouting profession, you don't often get to just live where you want for an extended period of time. You bounce around, and a lot of my travels have taken me to the southeast and to the Midwest, so on and so forth. So I don't get to see them as often. But I will say I was really fortunate to grow up in this profession. And I was also fortunate that my dad at the time had been in some really good situations where the level of success allowed for us not to have to move around, not to have to bounce around. And so I really grew up in two places, in Tempe, Arizona, and Southern California, and had a great upbringing, and have been running around in a locker room since I could walk, and going to training camps and sitting in the coaches' offices and kind of just taking it all in, if you will. So I've had two really fortunate things happen in my career, which I think are rare, and if you have the opportunity to do them, you should do them. Is I got to coach for my dad. And then years down the road, my dad actually worked for me. And to have that working experience and that back and forth and all those sorts of things is really special, and I'm glad I got to do that.
Tom, in my mind, you've been a part of the evolution of the modern scouting and evaluating business in college football. Talk about Scouts Inc. and UCReport.
Well, I'll tell you. So the Scouts Inc. side of it, I actually got involved with them in between when the 2001 XFL season folded. And then I went to work for the Dallas Cowboys in both a scouting capacity, and then I was also heading up and coaching Jerry Jones's Arena Football League team at that time. And one of what Scouts Inc. was at that time was, and there's Blesto and National, and there's all these different, scouting services in professional football. And we were essentially in that world. But what we also had is we had contracts with media outlets, whether it was CNN, SI, whether it was the Sporting News, both written publication, and then eventually what grew into online and digital as we know it now, and then certainly linear television. And I always called us like the third opinion, right? You have your coaches in-house, your scouting department in-house, and then we would have information farmed out to us just for another set of eyeballs that doesn't have a voice, doesn't have a horse in the stable. We're looking at it purely objectively, and then we would provide the objective feedback. And then the programs, or at that time it was at the NFL level, the teams would make their own decisions, right? But it's just like anything else. You're trying to avoid making that mistake, right? A lot of people don't realize in the National Football League in the first round, they all get one pick in the first round, and they miss on it 50% of the time. And that's with having all of the available information. So what we ended up kind of doing is we kind of took what I would call a pro personnel model in a private entity. And that's what we started applying to high school football recruiting. You coached at a time, and my father coached at a time, and I'm a little bit past it, where all the coaches were doing the recruiting and the GAs were doing the recruiting. And there was no scouting department. There was no player personnel department. There wasn't even a director of player personnel. It wasn't run quite like that. And I think that's where Nick Saban probably deserves a lot of the credit of going back to Michigan State, then of course LSU, taking that pro personnel model and instituting it, not just the principles of it and the how and the why, but having to build the manpower to be able to do it. I mean, you're asking for a lot of resources that never really existed before. And so we kind of took that model and applied it to what we were doing at ESPN, because I was never in and had no intention or want to be involved in the internet website recruiting side of things. It's a great sub-based model. They do really, really well. I have no interest in saying, hey, where's so-and-so taking his 5 visits to? And is so-and-so narrowed his choices down to 10 schools? I don't care. Like, none of that matters to me. I want to know, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? Where are the pitfalls? What are the areas that need to be addressed? What should we be worried about? Red flags? Where does he project? And all of those sort of things. So that's kind of the approach that we started with at ESPN in 2006. Fast forward to now, and the UCReport really became, it was born off of conversations that, as I went on the road, this would have probably been around, 2013, 14, somewhere around. I'd go on the road, and whether it be in the spring or it'd be in the fall when I'm doing games, and just talking to various programs and asking this kind of one simple question: what is your biggest challenge in recruiting right now? And almost to a program, it didn't matter if it was Alabama, who's got great resources, all the way down to a group of 5 school. It was, we can't keep up. We're not staffed to identify an 8th grader, a freshman, even a sophomore. We're worried about the current class and then trying to identify and work on the next class. And again, this was several years ago. So what we did at the time, and this is specific to UCReport, is we thought, well, what if we had a way of doing all of that work in advance? Meaning, if we could do what the NCAA does not allow college coaches to do, which is actually be on site at a camp or a combine, all right, gather all that information, have fresh eyes in person, all right, and then somehow house it in a one-stop shopping type of scenario. Like, I wonder how that would go over. And so at the time we had, and still do, we put together the Under Armour All-America game at ESPN. And so we have exclusive rights to the camp and combine circuit, meaning that information and all of the video that comes from it and how the camps are actually operated is run by us. Then we went out and we did the same thing, and we gathered the information from the Elite 11. We own the exclusive rights to that. And essentially what we did is we put together this profile that when you register for one of those camps, you have to fill it out. All right. And it is unbelievably detailed. So we started gathering a lot of information, and I'm talking, Randy, information that goes down to the 8th grade guidance counselor, to the vice principal at the high school, the athletic trainers, all of that stuff, contact information, everything you can possibly imagine that you would need. All right. What the UC stands for underclassmen is we went out and we were more in the identification phase, Randy, not so much the evaluation phase, meaning that we're going to watch the tape, we're going to apply a grade, we're going to write a report. We're going to have all of the video there for you. We're going to have all of the information that you're going to need. here it is. All right. Now you're going to make your own evaluation, right? So we're giving our feedback based off of what we see when we first see these guys. So what happens is, let's just say a player decides to go to a camp and he's in our middle school circuit. All right. Well, when he arrives at that thing, we do hand size, arm length, wingspan, height, weight. We do the 110 split, the 40, the short shuttle, the 3-cone L drill, all of the testing things that you can possibly imagine. And it's all laser time. There's no handheld stuff. And then we put them through actually football specific drills. We tape and video every single rep that a prospect has, okay, at that camp. The good, bad, and the ugly, all of it. We then cut all that up. So let's just say that player shows up in 8th grade, and then he shows up again in 9th grade. And then he goes to another camp in 10th grade. We now have a library of 3 years on that kid before he's ever even entered into his sophomore or junior year that we can now have as part of the product to sell to the schools who may not be able to dive that deep right now. So it's kind of like, we're doing all the work. Here it is. You figure out what you want to do with it. You make your own opinion of it. But owning the exclusive rights to the video, like if I were to tell you, I'm a coach and I can't, NCAA rules preclude me from going out to an Elite 11 camp or an Under Armour camp or anything off campus to evaluate. And what we're doing is we're taking quarterback A, and he's gone to 3 camps over 4 years, and we have 60 reps of him on HD video, going through a variety of drills, a variety of different things, plus all of the information we've gathered along the way. So we're kind of taking the legwork out of it. Even though the programs are still doing it, they're attacking it, and there are a variety of different scouting services around there. What we were able to do is kind of put it all in one spot. You can build your board through UCReport if you want to. We developed what we call max speed, so we could do a mile per hour algorithm on players on tape, which has become a hugely popular deal. And so that's kind of, I know that was a long-winded way of going about it, but it was really kind of just born of what we found out were the challenges for coaches in today's game of football.
Coach, what would you say? We get people that watch this and want to learn how to do this or get into this business. What makes you, or what do you think makes a good evaluator?
Well, I think that you've got to be very, very careful getting too enamored with physical measurables. I know that we all have an ideal set of standards that we want and things of that nature. And you know, for example, at the quarterback position, you know, back when I was coming out, that was the early 90s, 6-foot quarterbacks weren't getting recruited to play Power 5 football. Well, they're all over the place now, right? So I think I would say 2 things really come to mind that I felt like I learned at a young age. Number one, does the prospect, and I think this is true at any level, does the prospect love football? And I'm not talking about on Saturdays. I'm talking about love football to the point that he's going to do all of the other things that it's going to require for a player with great ability to actually play like one. All right. I think that's very, very important. And then I'm a huge believer in productivity. How good of a football player are you? Do you produce? I think Zach Thomas is a great example of this. He's 5'11", he's 230 probably pounds coming out of Texas Tech. And you would look at him, and if you just went off of the measurables, you wouldn't take him. And you start watching the tape, and all the guy does is find the football and make tackles. That's all he does. He's a tackling machine. But he wasn't 6'3", he wasn't 255. So I think sometimes we allow production to maybe overlap something that can be measured. And then I also think we do the exact opposite. I think we allow measurable standard athletic traits, wow moments to cloud our judgment on consistent productivity. And don't want to point any fingers here, but like I look at, and I still can't believe he was a top 5 pick. I still cannot believe Anthony Richardson was a top 5 pick. I know athletically he's a top 5 pick. How can you be that talented and complete 53% of your passes? And didn't play a lot, battled injury, and wasn't overly productive. Like that concerns me. And I would say the same thing about Will Levis at Kentucky. turned the ball over a lot, injured a lot, but very physically gifted. I get that. And I understand at the National Football League level, their mindset is, well, if we're going to miss, let's at least miss on a talented guy. Let's not take a reach on a guy that we're not convinced isn't talented enough to do it. But I think those two things, does the player love football and all of the things that go with it, and making sure you don't allow something to trump how productive the football player is.
Do you think coaches believe they can coach a kid better than where he is today, and is that's part of the problem, that they'll be able
there's
to
ego is definitely a part of the problem. I don't think there's any question about that. And it's the old mentality, well, when he gets in our building and in our culture, we'll fix him. Okay. And sometimes that may be true. I think, in all fairness to what I just outlined with you, there was a ton of question about Josh Allen, right? He was supremely talented, injured quite a bit, had a high turnover rate, and he's gone the other way. And so I think that's what people are looking at when they see Will Levis talent-wise or Anthony Richardson talent-wise. But then you have a guy like, to me, you have a guy that was at Washington and Fresno State, and Jake Haener, that was unbelievably productive. I mean, ridiculously productive. And he slips, and that goes to a great situation in New Orleans, and you kind of say, okay, I can kind of see that one. And but yeah, I think ego gets involved. How can it not, right? Those guys are making millions upon millions of dollars and have done this for a long time, and you do see that mentality, I think.
Do you see more changes, or what are the changes you see in scouting that are coming? Anything that there's so much technology and.
Yeah, I think, from a scouting perspective, I don't know how much, like, what more we can do in terms of, now there's always going to be science involved, and the science side of it has really come into the training part of the athlete, and the strength conditioning world has vastly changed, and you've got the catapult systems, and they know when to pull back, and they can measure whether somebody's playing hard or not. That part of it, by the way, I love that part of it. You go into some of these programs, and before practice, they have a list of who was given the most effort the day before, and a list below the line who wasn't. I mean, that's what a verifiable, measurable data point that a player can't argue with. So from a coaching perspective, that stuff's great. I do think from a scouting perspective, we will continue to evolve. And I think one thing that has slightly changed is I hear from more and more coaches and scouts that they're more interested in the 110 of the 40 than they are the 40. And they're also more interested in the 3-cone L drill. Nobody probably would have said that 30 years ago. And, the 40 is this huge measuring stick. So I think that has shifted to some degree. And I really believe this. I think the people in scouting that are scouting who they're getting as a guy, that are putting a lot of stock in that, are the ones eventually over the course of time that will have fewer misses. Because you've been in this way longer than I have. And I tell people when they ask me about, well, why didn't this guy make it? Why didn't that guy make it? 99% of the time, it has nothing to do with physical attributes. It's something else. There's something that you either identified in the evaluation process and you thought you could deal with it and it backfired on you, or it's something you didn't know about. And then once you get the guy, you're stuck with it. So, something as simple as being away from home the first time, being accountable for your own time. Do you show up to meetings routinely late? Do you miss treatment? Are you not in study hall when you're supposed to be? Who are you hanging around with? Can you handle being yelled at and being coached hard? How do you deal with support staff people? Are you rude? Do you say please and thank you? I mean, these are all little simple, little things, but what they also do, in my opinion, is they're a great indicator of what kind of human being you're getting. Is the guy constantly in the weight room, or is the guy missing the weight room? Like, all of these different things have absolutely nothing to do with how physically talented a guy is. And so when those guys can't handle that side of it, they kind of weed themselves out. So I do think there's been more of a push now to really, really hit that side of it super, super hard. And I think with the transfer portal too, Randy, your relationship in recruiting, if a guy spurns you at the high school level, don't burn any bridges with that kid. You don't know what may happen, and the re-recruitment may start over, and you might have a spot. And I would say the same thing to the kid. When I don't like when kids go on TV and they play games with the hat thing, and you're showing a level of disrespect to a staff and multiple coaches that have put a lot of time and energy. Just thank them and say, hey, this is the place for me. I don't think we need to play those games and I know they're young people and they don't think that thing through, but there may be a coach somewhere that in the evaluation process goes, you know what? That kid was a real turd when he decided to go somewhere else. I think we should stay away from him. And you don't want for the kids, you don't want them to miss opportunities because of that type of conduct.
The other part of this, and we'll talk a little bit more about transfers, but the NIL is a huge factor in recruiting. How is this, or will this affect college football? Let's start there, and then we'll talk a little bit.
Well, I think anybody with half a brain knew that when you dumped this on the laps of every program in America, that this was going to seep into recruiting. And there was no way it wasn't going to. If somebody was that naive when they're putting all this stuff together, wow, that really would surprise me. And that's what's led to what is essentially pay for play right now. And, and everybody's talking about name, image, and likeness and the transfer portal and all of this stuff creating more parity. It's not creating more parity. It's widening the gap. You're never going to have Alabama's resources. 99% of the programs, no programs are created equal. So if I'm in recruiting and I'm dealing with a different deck of cards and I want to go out and we want to buy the best players, all right, then how is anybody supposed to close the gap? So I think that part of it is dangerous. And I also think what it will lead to is a bunch of players committing for all the wrong reasons, making a lot of mistakes, and then next thing you know, that doesn't pan out, and then the transfer portal hits. So, and the issue with name, image, and likeness, Randy, is because they're not employees, you can't put performance standards in the contracts. So essentially, you're saying, I'm going to pay you, but you don't have to be a starter. You don't have to be productive. You're not all conference. You're not all American. Now, if you're going to sit there and tell me, all right, well, who's worth it? Well, Bryce Young earned every penny of his name, image, and likeness. Why? Because he produced. What does production do? Provides value. Caleb Williams, by all means, go get all of it, right? CJ Stroud, get as much as you can. The guys that go out and earn it, I'm cool with. I think my biggest issue is there's no two-way street here. And like if you're Dabo Swinney at Clemson, who's more disappointed in DJ Uiagalelei, Dr. Pepper or you? Right? And so that, I just think that I think you could make a fair argument. This is the most transformative legislation in intercollegiate athletics over the last 40 years, and especially one that's this large, this vast, has so many unanswered questions, and it was dumped on the laps of everybody with no blueprint on how to execute it. All right, well, if we're going to execute it a certain way, how are we going to police it? And then if we're going to police it, how are we going to enforce it? And we have none of that now. And that's concerning to me. I think the other thing too, and again, this whole discussion of recruiting, NIL, transfer portal, it's not going away until we figure out a way to put in some guidelines, put in some guardrails, put in some rules and enforcement and this and that doesn't end up being in court, because the players are going to push back and they're going to say, well, you're restricting my ability to earn. That's antitrust. Well, then the way you do this is you're going to have to go away from the scholarship model and you're going to have to collectively bargain. Right? I mean, it's really kind of the only way that we stay out of court in all of this. And for me, I think my biggest concern is there has to be give and take. I know the players want everything, and the coaches want there to be some structure and some rules, and then they want to be able to do their deal. But I compare it to the NFL rookie contract, right? So you got an NFL rookie contract, it's 4 years. It's pretty ironclad. You have established ceilings, established floors, right? And you're going to play that contract. If you are a rookie in the NFL and you've been drafted and you go out and you make the Pro Bowl as a rookie, you don't just get to go be a free agent and be on the open market. In college football, that's exactly what you can do. There's no cap. There are no rules to your movement. You can take the money and run. And like the NFL would never allow that, right? Because they've come together, they've come to agreement in the middle, and that's what we're lacking right now in terms of this is input and structure on the player side, and then input and structure on the university side.
Do you think we'll get to signing contracts? I mean, is that? And now I do know this, and I believe this: the recent change in only allowing one transfer with immediate eligibility. I think that's really helped the system. And how do you think that's going to be? Is that kind of the saving grace in many ways?
Potentially. Now, is that applying to guys with their degrees too, or just without a degree?
Without a degree. So
see, that's the other problem though, is okay, without the degree, but the ones who've gotten a degree, like a JT Daniels, well, nowadays, the way these kids early enroll and they're in summer school, they can graduate in 2.5 years. Well, if you got your degree, heck, you could transfer 3 or 4 times and still be eligible.
Yeah, I'd have to actually, I better, before I say that, I'd have to reread that. But I do think that the only being able to transfer the one time and play immediately is a really good thing. So that next time you want to do it, you're going to have to sit and lose that.
Yeah, there's a deterrent. Yeah, there's a deterrent of some sort. Because right now, and I'm not a get off my lawn guy on this thing. I'm really not. But we're making everything so easy if things don't go your way. And I had a speech I was talking for about 15 minutes to about 50 of the top prospects that were underclassmen in the country this past summer at our Future 50 event. And a snippet of it was put on the internet and somewhat taken out of context because the previous portion of what I was speaking of was tied into what I'm going to get into here. Is the one thing that I know is a constant, and it's a common denominator amongst coaches. They don't want kids that are uncoachable and non-competitors. They don't. That's not what they're interested in. And what's happened is with the transfer portal, this is where I get worried. Is a player's a great player coming out of high school. Everybody's recruited him, right? Everybody's patting him on the back, telling him how good he is. Then he arrives on campus. All right. Now all of a sudden he's one of a bunch of guys that were all him, right? When they were in high school. And that coach that was loving him up is all of a sudden screaming and yelling at him, and the de-recruitment phase starts. And you're bombarded with responsibility and accountability for your time, and you're away from home, and there's a lot going on, right? And depending on the level of maturity of the player, a lot of them can't handle that, or they don't have the ability to battle through that and to compete and be adverse. And I'm not just talking about competing athletically. I'm talking about competing mentally, because it's hard. I mean, that's a big jump. And guys who've taken it will tell you that. And my issue is we have so many guys in the transfer portal that haven't even been on campus for 2 years, because their first inclination is, when things don't go my way, I'm going to take my ball and go home. And that's not everybody, but there's a lot of guys like that. And you look at the numbers, there's been 2,500, 3,000, people in transfer portal. Go back and look at what their graduating year class was. It'll be like 2021, 2022. 2020. They haven't battled. And listen, I'm for player freedoms, but we don't ask them to have to fight and compete like they're going to have to as a grown adult when they enter the professional world, right? I mean, that's something that I think is a slippery slope. Other transfer scenarios. I was in a transfer scenario where I was the starting quarterback. I actually had beaten out another player that I knew was the starting quarterback the year before I got there. So I knew when I transferred there, I was going to have to beat out a guy that started the year before. We have a coaching change. They go to more of a quarterback run-based type of scheme, and he was a much better athlete than I was, okay? I had a redshirt year. I could have transferred to another power school, just sat out, still had a year of eligibility. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to play right away. I didn't have any interest in doing that, so I transferred down to Eastern Kentucky. Right. So there are different reasons like why a person transfer. I wasn't recruited out of high school. I had to go to junior college and prove myself, which I did. Ended up doing well enough to earn multiple Power 5 scholarship offers 2 years later. So I kind of had to earn it. I had to go make it happen. And I think we've taken that away a little bit with the younger player, that if sometimes maybe they just need a coach to pull them over the side, or somebody to say, hey, listen, man, hang in there. I don't know. Have you ever seen that Tubby Smith quote about his dad? When he was mentioned he was talking about this same subject that we're talking about. He was talking about the transfer portal with basketball, and he had called his dad and said, I want to come home. I want to leave. He goes, you're not coming home. Your room's been rented out. You have two choices. You can stay there, or you can go to the Army. And then, Tubby goes on to say that in his particular situation, he was glad he didn't leave. Right. And I think that's the other thing too with the transfer portal, Randy. Nobody's doing the math. There aren't enough scholarships for everybody. So you think you're going in there and all of this is going to start over again, unless you've been tampered with. There may not be a landing spot, and you better be careful when you make that choice, and be careful who you're listening to. Are you listening to the right people? And do they have your best interest in mind? And have you really thought it through and realized what you'd be getting into if you choose to make this move? And I just think those are all things that we're still navigating our way through.
Yeah, these are young kids making adult decisions.
Yeah,
before they're ready to make them, and
yeah,
you see that all the time. And I think the NCAA has a tendency to pass a rule, and then it takes them about 2 years to figure out that, oh, we need to fix it, and then they fix it and hopefully get it right. So that's kind of how I see them. Let's go back to talking about players and the evaluating side of it, and get off the politics a little bit. Sorry, I brought that up. That was my bad.
Oh, it's okay. It's literally, in my profession, I mean, it's a topic of conversation on just about everything. You can't avoid it now. It's just changed the whole landscape of the game.
Yeah, and I think you made some great points that people are going to take away and use to make decisions or in their future. So talk about the players. So the game has changed quite a bit in evaluating and recruiting. Mm-hmm. When and how did length become so important?
I think length became so important because, and I have just a tremendous amount of respect for really successful FCS and group of 5 level coaches, because they're having to make so much more of a projection, right? And they're not necessarily getting to come right in, play right away, may not need to redshirt. They're getting the guy that they're having to say in their mind, okay, I think this guy, he'll be able to carry another 40 pounds. All right. He's got super long arms. He doesn't look like much now. Get him on campus, feed him, get him in the weight room, redshirt him. Maybe he doesn't play much as a redshirt freshman, and all of a sudden, as a redshirt sophomore, that guy's a completely different dude. And I just think length and speed have somehow kind of come together. And with, I mentioned the FCS programs and the G5 schools and some of those are the guys that they're targeting. And it's one of the reasons why you see, like Leighton Vander Esch, the defensive end for the Cowboys. It was at Boise. He was one of those guys. A lot of the guys we've seen at tight end and at defensive end that have come through Iowa, they were those types of guys, right? And I just think you have far more late bloomers than you have ready-made guys. Everybody always focuses on the 4 and the 5-star guy, but there's 30 some odd schools and 85 guys on scholarship, and then you've got walk-ons. Well, they ain't all 4 stars, and they're not all developing at a rapid rate where they're just jumping up. So I think that the speed and the length side, because the game has become such a space game, and you have to be able to cover real estate, right? And when I say that, something as big a deal as wingspan, right, cuts down on real estate. It cuts down on space. It cuts down on windows. All of those sorts of things. The ability off of the first step edge. If you're a 6'6" kid and have that first step, all of a sudden you're 2.5, 3 yards in the backfield on one step. You've just covered real estate. I mean, I think that part of it, and the fact that more and more late bloomers that are tall and have length become really, really good players. It just happens later on.
So are long arms more important than strength and speed, or speed?
I would say strength, maybe, because that's something you continually can add. I don't know if you ever are gonna. To me, I remember some of those Jimmy Johnson early Miami teams, and I remember, some of those in UCLA and been some of those places. I think there was a real push in that late '80s, early '90s, where it was like speed's going to trump size, and if you can run, you can play. If you can run, we want you. I remember Urban Meyer when he was at Florida in the early days in their team staff meeting room. They had a big sign on the top of the wall that said, "Recruit the fastest team in America." Didn't say recruit the biggest, strongest, or longest. Recruit the fastest team in America. I just think that the length side of it, combined with the speed now because of the space and the field that's being attacked, has probably just gone up a few notches in level of importance.
So, as that evaluator, that's where you were talking about earlier about some of the other intangibles that the instincts and the want to and all of those other things kind of have to be evaluated to be sure that the length and the speed are valuable.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges in today's day and age of recruiting and evaluating quarterbacks is, what do they actually know about the game, right? Because we've gone from not that long ago where you had to beg your coach to be in the shotgun. Now you don't ever even see guys under center, rarely, right? We went from check with me's, and we went from changing things at the snap and operating things and being responsible for protections to sitting back, lifting your leg and clapping and throwing a bubble screen, right? Or, cutting the field in half and just doing, half field reads, which is fine. And it's revolutionized. The spread offense has revolutionized so many different things. But at the same time, I think oftentimes when you get these kids up on a board, they may be really talented and couldn't tell you what a one technique is, or couldn't tell you how, will safety pressure from the boundary, where are they vulnerable? And maybe they can't tell you. I go to camps and combines for the last 18 years, and I see guys with 15 offers. And if you ask them to take a 5-step drop and throw a 10 to 12 yard speed cut out, they can't do it. There's no footwork. There's no nothing. So I just think there's more to examine now. And I think, I think Andy Reid in the NFL is a great example of this. He born out of the West Coast offense womb his entire career. And they got that dude wearing number 15. And I think he kind of started realizing, and maybe it was before that these quarterbacks aren't being trained and groomed the way they used to be. They're not coming into our league prepared to have this much verbiage in a play call or to have all of these different things going on. So instead of us trying to stick a square peg into a round hole, we better start focusing on how they've been developed and trained and building around their strengths and trying to mask the weaknesses. And when you watch Kansas City now, Randy, they look like a college team. Like they really do. And not everybody has a Patrick Mahomes, but I do think there has to be, like, I don't think size is anywhere near what it was I don't want to say intended to be, but it used to be that was just, if you weren't this tall, you weren't playing, particularly at the Power 5 level. It didn't matter how good of a player you were, right? And then, that's, I think, the shotgun, spreading people thin, opening up windows to see the field better, moving the launch point, moving the pocket. It's really created more opportunities for the undersized player that wouldn't have had them in the 80s or the 90s or even maybe the late 90s. And I like to see that part of it, because I still think at the end of the day, quarterback play is about two things: decision making and accuracy. There are strong arms, there are average arms, there are quick feet, there are slow feet. Can you process, and do you throw the ball to the right place? I mean, really, that's why, I bring up Bryce Young again. I mean, there's not going to be a single, he'll walk through the door right now and there wouldn't be a single thing physically that would wow you about it. But he works at it. I had their offensive coordinator, who's now back with the Patriots, Bill O'Brien, tell us in a Sugar Bowl meeting this last year when they beat Kansas, said he's the best quarterback I've ever coached. You know who he's coached, right?
Yeah.
And so he said, he goes, when all those things we were talking about that have nothing to do with physical ability, he said he's got all of that in droves. He goes, and so what happens is you become less and less worried about him being 5'11", 6 foot, 185 pounds, because all of that other stuff that you can't coach matters so much, right? And I think that's great, because when you have the 6 foot guy and you find those things out about him, you don't worry one lick about recruiting him. You just don't.
Yeah. Let's switch gears real quick here. There are some new rules in the college game that are designed to shorten the length of the game. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at these, but eliminate consecutive timeouts by a team. Eliminate the untimed down at the end of the first and third quarter, kind of like it's a little bit like I guess it's not an NFL thing, but and then the running clock after first downs, which is the NFL thing. So what are your feelings about those changes? How will that impact us? Because you're going to be out there on the sideline or in the booth.
Yeah.
How do you see those helping the game?
Well, it's going to help the pace of play of the game. And I think from a fan perspective, the games they're running too long, 3.5, 3:45. I broadcasted in the XFL last spring, and, some of their rules are very, very unique, but their clock rules were fantastic. I mean, those games were done in 2:45, right? 15-minute quarters, all right? But eliminated some of that, that hidden time. And I think that's what college football is trying to work towards a little bit. It may limit some of the plays offensively that you have an opportunity to get in, just because, there's you're going to have more time ticking off the clock. I like it. I think it's good that we have fewer stoppages. And I think the next thing that needs to happen in college football, we got to stop reviewing every single play. We got to stop pressing that button down. Unless something's glaring, we got to play football. Let's go. And that in and of itself would change so much about the pace of play and the length of games. And we're not quite there yet. And I listen, I think you're going to see potentially over the next couple of years, I think you're going to be potentially seeing a shift in the kickoff return game to make that safer, ensure that you still have it as part of the game, but make it safer. Maybe you're after kick or extra points, you give more opportunities than just one or two, and see, who's willing to maybe do that. And so I don't know. I think it's a good thing to sum it up. I really do.
Is there a way for the athlete to get in the UCReport, or how do they? Is it by going to the camps or all that? What's the best way for them to get in front of your eyes?
So what we're doing is we're gathering information, lists and lists and lists, just like you used to do in the old days, right? And then we're inputting it, and then the evaluation part of it starts. And then we have two sets of camps. We have essentially an invite camp, which is going to be geared toward and focused on probably 185 to 215 kids per camp. But these kids would be established guys that we know have offers early. They are highly recruitable young players. And then we have more of an open market combine that's going to get into the 400 and 500 number of kids that we don't know enough about yet, that maybe haven't been identified or recruited. Now we're giving them same instruction, and we're asking them to fill out the same information, because that's who we're going to start finding guys from is out of that pool. And what we do as a qualifier, sometimes when we run those on a weekend, we'll do the combine on a Saturday, the camp on a Sunday, and we'll take, let's just say, the top 2 or 3 guys at each position that showed up for the combine, and we'll ask them to come back the next day and see how they compete against the other guys. And so it's really we're just gathering initially names. I mean, I'm sure you remember college sports data.
Yeah,
was a big thing for a long time, right? Where it's just you're just trying to get so that you can build your database. And then what we're starting to do is we start to just go based off of elimination of what we know. Then what do we need to find out? Who do we need to go get? when I'm in the process of doing whatever our minimums are per day and per week for each one of our guys that we're doing it, there's times where I'll go and try to watch the tape, and he'll have the huddle account. We'll have it in there, and it's blank. There's nothing on it. So we got to go out and get that tape, right, and so that we can get that guy done. That doesn't happen often, but it does happen. But I think the other thing too is, and I say this to prospects all the time, they are in an era where if you put in an ounce of effort of being proactive, you can make all your recruiting dreams come true. If you're moderately proficient on a computer, if you can send a text, send an email, send a direct message, you can get to every program in America in the blink of an eye. Whereas in the old days, I mean, you had to wait for those coaches to come in the spring. They're bringing their VHS tapes. Coach is dubbing them. You're taking them back, and then you're waiting for foot traffic in the fall. And you didn't even really get recruited until the spring of your junior year, if you were going to get recruited at all. Now these kids can get seen, they can get viewed, they can be evaluated, and I tell them, I'm like, guys, I have a little seminar thing I put together. I'm like, this is not rocket science. If you follow a few, certain things and just be a little bit proactive, and then when you do those sorts of things and you do come to a combine or you do come to a camp, everything you've now done is going out to over, I don't know, close to 130, 140 schools. If you combine FCS, the Ivy League we have, Group of Five, and then we have every Power Five school but one, and so they can help themselves. And I'll tell you the other thing too that we talk about that's important in player evaluation now more than ever before. Kids have got to understand that their social media habits are being studied. What they are putting on social media is being evaluated, and I think I always tell them, guys, before you click send, just think twice. Because you think you can delete it, it lives forever on the internet. And I know, and I've been in certain buildings with certain programs that have one or two guys assigned to do nothing but check all of the guys they're recruiting and check their social media and report to the head coach every morning. This is what Johnny Smith put on there. This is what Bobby Wells put on there. This is what so-and-so put on there. And just don't blow an opportunity through conduct that's totally preventable,
Yeah, I lived by the idea that everything is evaluated,
Yes.
including parents or relatives or all those different things that an athlete has in his world is evaluated. Mm-hmm. So I think that's great advice.
Randy, the other thing too, and you've asked me how has recruiting changed maybe quite a bit, and I think because of the limited contact that coaches now have with prospects, getting a kid to come to your camp where you can physically coach him is more important now than it has ever been maybe in the history of the game. Because of all in my opinion, because of all the adulation and all the praise and the expectation, and these kids oftentimes can think that they've got it made, and there can be some entitlement, not with everybody, but it's there. It's part of the deal. You want to get that kid on your campus, and you want to get him in your practice setting, and you want to see what he does when he's coached hard. You want to see how he interacts with his peers. You want to see what his motor is like. You want to get a sense of how he is in your building with other people that are around him. And that, I have heard more about that becoming invaluable from coaches across America, maybe than anything else. Because if you have that, and maybe you get it once or twice, or a guy comes to your camp 3 times, I think that's invaluable.
No question about it. I have been recommending that for some time. So hey, Coach, I really appreciate you coming on with us. I'm gonna wrap this up for the folks watching, and you always have great information and have given us a lot to think about and a lot to work with. And I think if kids and parents pay attention to what you've said today on this, they're going to improve their opportunities, and the process will be easier for them. So I really appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate it too, Coach. I appreciate you having me on. Make sure you say hello to LeVar for me. He worked with us with the Under Armour All-America game for several years. And so it was good to have him out and around the kids.
Yeah, he's his son's good, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't forget that.
That's some pretty quality bloodlines.
Yeah, he sure does. So, folks, again, thanks for joining us on the Up on Game Network. Please subscribe to that. Rate us, review us. You can find us again on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. YouTube, go to Up on Game Network, and then Up on Game Presents. You can also follow me at Twitter at Taylor FB Scout. I don't know if that's Twitter or X anymore, but whatever it is. And please follow us. And you can watch our episodes anytime. We air on Fridays at 9 a.m. So please check us out there. And glad to see and glad to have Tom Luginbill on and appreciate his time. Thanks, Coach.
Thank you, Coach.